Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started here. I appreciate everybody that's been able to come out or been able to join us on Zoom. My name is Alex McDonald, Business Administrator for the Township. Tonight, we are going to have an informational session about the environmental study that has been done on the 9 Main Street location, or the 100% affordable development that has been a part of the Township's settlement with Fair Share Housing. Tonight, we have with us Paul Drucker and Laura Brinkerhoff of VHB, who will be going through the process, what we've done on this site to investigate the environmental impacts on the site. Tonight's format is going to kind of go like this. We're going to have Paul and Laura present from VHB. That's going to, and then we'll go into a question and answer period. We are going to, because we have quite a few people on Zoom, we are going to limit the initial period to 3 minutes. Certainly, if we have time, we will allow everybody to come back up and ask additional questions or whatever. I just ask that everybody be respectful tonight, that everybody have decorum in this presentation and their questions. We will limit everybody to 3 minutes, but once we go back around, there is a hard stop at 9 p.m. tonight. This meeting was advertised from 7 to 9 p.m. and we will have a hard stop at 9. This meeting is being recorded, will be posted to the Township's website. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who is the LSRP on the site. We'll get started with the presentation.
Yeah, got that right here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Drucker. I'm a licensed segregated professional with VHB. I'm here with Laura Brinkerhoff as a technical advisor. If anybody wants any cards, they're here later. Oh, closer. Sorry. So I'll take you through the process of what we did with the Township of Millburn. We were contracted back in, I think, October to look at this site for environmental, potential environmental areas of concern. And to do that, what we did is called a preliminary assessment. That's a DEP process where you take a property like this and you do a records search, you do a site inspection to figure out if there are any potentially contaminated areas of concern, which I'll call AOCs moving forward. That's just an acronym. There'll be a few acronyms, and I'll try to spell them out for you. So we initially started by doing the entire DPW site, and we found about 15 areas of concern throughout the whole site, and but only, I think there were 6 on the area that's going to be redeveloped. So in talking with the town, what we ended up doing was just focusing on the area that's going to be developed. There's really no reason to focus on here. There's no development going here. So we just started working on this area. And the AOCs we found that are particularly in this area are, we found there was a former above ground storage tank field here that had fuel oil. There was a, let's see, AOC 3 here. There's an existing active fuel station that has diesel fuel and gasoline from DPW vehicles. There is fill material that was brought in to raise the grade of the site. There are former railroad tracks, and there are a couple areas where the township accepts recyclable material. And in this case, this recyclable material was just limited to bulk material like metals or computers or brush or whatever. So these weren't really anything we're really concerned about. So then what we did after the preliminary assessment is we identified the AOCs that we wanted to investigate, take soil samples, see if there's any contamination there. And those are represented, I can't really see them on here, but we did about, I'll just go right to this slide here, I'll go back to the other one. So for the site investigation, we ended up doing 12 soil borings throughout the site. We did a few down here to investigate the fill. We did a couple along the rail lines. We did 4 around the existing fueling station. And we did 1 where the former ASTs used to be. And that was it for the SI. Now, the results of the SI indicated that the fill here had some impacts of what's called benzoate pyrene, some arsenic, some lead, and some mercury. So this is the fill material that used to be stockpiled on the site that was used to raise the grade that the DEP approved back in the early 90s. So even though it was approved back in the 90s, standards have changed. We went back just to evaluate it by today's standards, and we did. And based on today's standards, we just had a couple of impacts of metals and this benzoate pyramid here. The railroad tracks here, we found a couple hits of mercury, nothing that exceeded the standard. Around the fueling system here, we didn't find any impacts. We didn't find any evidence that this is leaking at the moment. By the above ground tanks, we didn't find anything. And right, so we left it there. Now, based on these data you see here, we did what's called a remedial investigation. That means we wanted to define, because we had some impacts here, we wanted to see how expansive this is, how deep it goes, how wide it goes. And if you come up later and look at this, you can see there's these green dots. They're not too visible from where you're sitting, but these green dots indicate all the samples we took that actually comply with the DEP standards. We specifically targeted some along the border here that we were told, well, there's old plans that show that the material was pushed up against a native berm. They used the clean material to create a berm here, and they filled it in. And we sampled the berm just to confirm that it is clean. So there's a clean barrier between the site and these properties. And we found out that this berm is clean. Material on this side of the berm have various levels of impacts of the benzoate pyramid, the mercury, and the lead. And some of our borings that we installed go in this direction. We also saw film material that was similar to this, not exactly like this, but there was film material along the former rail line and behind here. This used to be a larger building where the trains would go in, so we did a couple of borings back here. And it was really just like a sandy film material. There were levels of some of these contaminants, but not above DEP standards. So we considered that these impacts we have here are delineated. We have an idea of what it's limited to, and we have a draft remedial investigation report documenting all this that we'll probably try to get in the public system by the end of the month. There's a couple of other things we have to do before we can upload that report. There's some forms you have to fill out and go to the DEP's website. They won't do a bunch of stuff. But so basically the film material here extends down to about 9 feet. This is represented by, this map represents the film material. This here is this is the stuff that was used to raise the grade. This is based on the site plans that the town has. This is stuff that's more associated with what was underneath, well, probably what was underneath the railroad tracks here. And this extends down to 3 to 5 feet, and this extends about to 9 feet. This green here represents where the berm was, and this orange is the limits of the proposed development. That's basically the gist of what we did. We did the assessment to identify areas that might be contaminated. We did a site investigation to see if they were contaminated, and the remedial investigation to see how expansive that contamination was. So all this we did per the DEP guidance. They have several guidance documents. They have a preliminary assessment guidance, which is basically an instruction booklet of how you do a preliminary assessment. That PA was done per that guidance. The SI and the RI was the same deal. So I think that's basically a quick rundown of investigation.
Yeah, understood. And that's sort of the process that has been gone through for the last 7 to 9 months. Can you just explain a little bit further about what the preliminary assessment was? This was a draft document that the township did eventually have on its website. It was about 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
So maybe just explain a little bit further about what that is.
Yeah. So a preliminary assessment is basically, it's a due diligence exercise where the purpose is so the town can figure out, or anybody, you can do it on any property, and you look at, you get any reports that DP may have on file about the site, if they have any reports the town might have, any violations, any permits, and you compile those and you review them to find out, okay, was a tank removed from this property? You found out that there were no tanks removed from this area. Then you do your site inspection, you actually physically walk around, take pictures, you say, okay, there's fuel on, there's a bunch of fuel pumps here, there's some vehicles parked here, there's some staining, this is where the tracks were, I don't see any evidence of those. And you compile all this available information into a report And at the end of the report, you have findings and recommendations would say, well, we found the existing fuel system here as a potentially contaminated area of concern. Let's go investigate this further. Let's take samples so we can assess if this is, in fact, something we need to worry about. And the same thing with the fill areas of the railroad tracks. Does that answer the?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of gives sort of the due diligence of what was done on the entire site.
It's a fact-finding exercise.
And I think that the other part that you had mentioned is that, you know, some of the concern, why wasn't the rest of the site done through SI, through RI?
Right.
You had answered that, in which that there was only part of the site that was looking to be developed. The other parts of the site would still operate as a DPW.
Yeah, there's no reason. Yes, this is where the development is. There's no reason to do any of the investigation on this area.
I think we'll get to questions then. But what I think the other question I had is, when you did your borings, did you encounter groundwater on the site?
No, we didn't encounter groundwater. We did a deep boring here, and we did a deep boring over here to try to find groundwater. And here we hit bedrock at about 18 feet, and we didn't find the groundwater. Here, I think we went closer to 30 feet, and there's no groundwater. So that bedrock is just where you have to bring in a much bigger machine to get through it. But there's no evidence that the soil wasn't even wet at all.
And then I think part of all of this, and obviously you had mentioned that the remedial investigation is still in draft form and will be submitted to the DEP. I think you had told me earlier, Paul, that report actually isn't due until 2025. However, obviously with the schedule associated with this development, that changes, and so that's why toward the end of the month we're looking to have that final report that will obviously be disseminated and put up on the township website. But can you just speak to the recommendation that comes from that report based on the findings, based on what you've explained here in these areas of concern that were then done through the RI?
Right, yeah, so the recommendation of the RI is based on the level of contamination that's delineated on site. Oh, I'm sorry, an RI is a remedial investigation. So the SI is the site investigation. Remedial is, you basically investigate if remediation needs to be done. So the recommendation is based on levels of contamination that are just in soil. Is you can cap the site. Basically, you can use asphalt or a building. It has to be a certain thickness, this cap, and a deed notice. So anybody who's going to do any kind of work on the site or buy the site sees in the deed that what the levels of contamination are. That's the DP accepted appropriate remedial action for a site that has levels like this and has a intended future use of residential.
Hold on one second. We'll get to questions. I just want to make sure we're done with the presentation part, and then we can get into the questions. I know everybody's eager to ask some questions. Does that conclude your presentation then, Paul?
Yeah. I mean, I think questions will be
right. We'll expand next. I'm the business administrator. Okay, great. So now we'll open it up to questions. Obviously, we're going to ask everybody to come up, ask your question if you can. State your address, state your location. For the record, so to speak. Again, this meeting is being recorded, and we're going to ask that you keep your initial question period to 3 minutes, and so that everybody has an opportunity to ask a question. Once you're finished asking questions, we will then answer the questions, those questions that can be answered. If there's additional information that we need to gather or get, certainly we'll do that and get back to you. But at this point, we'll start the question and answer period.
Thanks. Yes. Hi, Judy Rosenthal, 97 Main Street, which is 2 blocks down from the proposed site. You mentioned some different soil borings, and you mentioned a couple of metrics. One I think was 9 feet, another was 18 feet. What is the total, or the total depth to which you bored?
The deepest boring we did was 30 feet.
Okay.
That was that was when we were really trying to get down the groundwater, but with the bedrock, we just couldn't go any further.
Okay, now, you know, this would be developed as a residential site, correct?
Yes.
And if there's contamination, you mentioned capping.
Yes.
So what you're saying is that in this residential space, there would be no green space if in the event that they find.
You can have landscape as a cap. What the cap follows the DEP's presumptive remedy guidance, which is a guidance that says if you have asphalt, you have to have a certain amount of material in between the asphalt and the contaminated material. If you have landscaping, it has to be a certain amount of clean material that separates the surface from the contaminated material, and there's always some kind of visible barrier. So if anybody's digging out there, they hit a visible like snow fence or something, so they know that it's there, and that's all recorded in the deed notice.
Are you saying that there could be a large lawn area for kids to play on?
Yes.
Okay. Did you study any migration, off-site, you know, contaminated migration, either coming from another site onto this site or from this site going off-site?
We didn't do, based on the data that we have, there's no reason to look at an off-site. There's no real source of it. We knew the source of the contamination that we found was the fill. And we didn't see that it was going off-site based on our borings around that berm there. And we have a few borings and samples a little bit further to the east that were all clean. So we didn't go any further than those.
Okay, but you didn't test the entire site, correct?
We tested the area that's going to be developed.
Right, so you didn't test the other
part. Not the entire DPW owned property.
Right, so is it fair to say that you can't say with 100% certainty that there's been no migration since you didn't test the entire site?
Well, migration of there's
contaminants.
But there's no case existing with the DEP from the DPW facility, and based on the borings that we did, we didn't see any obvious soil contamination down to 30 feet.
Right, but there's no case because there was no case opened up because the standards have changed, right?
No, the contamination on this site is what's opened up the case. And those contaminants aren't mobile. And anything that we did see wasn't at the border of the property.
Okay. Did you do an EIS or do you plan on doing an EIS, environmental impact statement?
That would be
done by the developer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Judy,
Right.
thank you.
Okay.
We're gonna stick to it. I know
I'll
we're gonna
wait.
stick to it. Hopefully
Yeah.
we can get to it. Just want to make sure that we're sticking so that everybody can get up and ask their questions. Thank you. But to answer that last question, an environmental impact statement would be done at planning board review at that point. Anyone else?
Chris Blanich, 58 Mountain View Road. And I just wanted to ask if you guys checked any records for underground tanks on the property? If there is any?
So
are you aware of that?
So part of the PA was to evaluate if there were underground tanks. We did an open request with the town for any kind of permits, either tank closures or registrations, and we didn't find anything. We also did a ground penetrating radar around the site to search for we can only get to accessible areas, but we searched the accessible areas of the site and see evidence of underground tanks.
So another question is this: if that findings are supposed to be filed with DEP no later than 2025, why we rush it and do it now?
So I'll answer that question. So the township settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing has a shovel in the ground date of October 2023 to start the development of this 100%.
But can you do other things other than this one, since you don't have to do it? I mean, file some other, plans which you have in development rather than this particular one, since you don't have to do it. You have a date. 2025.
I think the date of 2025 was just to explain in terms of the process that would normally have to be gone through with DEP. We are far ahead of that as a result of our accelerated schedule with the Fair Share Housing Settlement. It's not meant to say that nothing has to be done.
You don't have to do it till 2025.
Well, the 2025, the DEP gives you 3 to 5. If you just have soil contamination, they give you 3 years. If you have groundwater, they give you 5 years, and that's just for sites that are really contaminated, where you know it's going to take a long time.
It is contaminated. It is contaminated.
Well, we already, but
now,
sites
if
that
they're
are
going to
hard to
approve your plans, you're going to have to do what you have to do. Plus, they will have to approve cleanup process at the end.
the DP will have to approve the
in
permit application.
contaminated site, obviously.
Yeah.
So why rush with this particular site?
It's just to meet the time frame for the development.
But the time frame is written in the settlement agreement.
And the settlement can be changed, I suppose.
I'm not aware of that.
However, who will pay for cleanups like that? I mean, you can find a lot of additional contamination if you do the cleanup process. If you really follow guidelines and if you file with DEP and they will or may ask you to do additional studies, additional cleanup. So what about cost assessment and who will pay for it?
Who will pay for it is
Right.
it depends on either. I mean, it could be partially. I don't know how the payment's going to be worked out.
So here. Well, first of all, I think okay. Yep, I'm gonna try attempt to answer that question. Okay. So first and foremost, I think there are some decision points still left. Okay. In particular, when you talk about what is being recommended and what is required by the DEP is one thing. Okay. What may end up happening as a result of excavation in terms of the development. All right. And so when, and we actually went through this with the parking deck. Okay. So the parking.
Do it carefully because it may cost you a lot of money and you have till 2025 to do it.
I'm well aware of this. All right. So I'm just trying to answer the question so that what happened with the parking deck which was also historic fill. Okay. Was that in those areas that were excavated as a result of footings or borings or anything like that, that material obviously was then taken off site, okay? But the other material on the site was capped, much like we're talking about here.
I'm talking about cost. You're jumping into something which you don't know how much it's going to cost and what's involved in it. So it may take time and a lot of money before you clean the space.
And again, I don't mean to debate it here, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Okay, based on the recommendation that the site could be capped. So I'm just saying that if the site can be capped and that is the route that is chosen, then I don't think the cost is as exorbitant as you may feel.
Do you
so
have any numbers?
With that, I'm just going to ask. We're going to move on, but I'm going to get to the next person I want to ask a question. But I'm just saying.
For the record, since this is my husband speaking, he's not speaking as a citizen. This is what he did for 35, 40 years. He worked in textile industry, cleanups, and worked with DPA. So he's not coming at this as a novice.
Understood.
Okay, so just.
I assume nobody in this room comes at things as a novice. Okay.
So you give very competent answers, except dollar.
I mean, dollar numbers, obviously.
If the town has to pay for it, it can be a lawyer's cost.
Well, I think first and foremost, if the site is to be capped, that could mean that there is no soil excavated from the site, correct? Right. So there could be no soil.
That's what he said.
I know. I'm trying to answer the question. I'm getting some background noise and some distracted. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is if it's capped, as is the recommendation, there could be very little cost to that remediation. Now, if there are certain things that are excavated as a result of the construction, if it's the footing or the boring, the foundations or whatever, then that is a cost that is borne by the developer who has taken over the site and is developing the project. So I think that hopefully answers your question. Do I have a specific dollar figure? No, because that depends on the cost of fuel, the truck, the tonnage, all of that stuff that goes into, as you know, and having done it, that goes into the cost. I'm sure. No, I'm all right. Who's next?
Hi, I'm Joanne Hughes and I live on Ferncliff Terrace. But that is my question too. Are we as taxpayers going to be assessed the cost of remediating this? And second question, I may not have understood correctly. I think you said there was an area in the dump which was just for trash, and so you did not test that area. Did I get that right?
There are several areas in the development that are for recycling.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and when we did our site inspection, we found that they were for brush and for metals. Nothing that was. We looked for hazardous materials.
But
I said before, we didn't see any hazardous materials in those bins.
When I've been at the dump, I've seen people dumping paint cans, oil cans, things that are not supposed to be put in that area. So wouldn't that be a good idea to test that area also?
Well, the borings that we did throughout the site, if a lot of those cover some of those areas, at least areas near those, some of those were on pretty thick concrete. We sampled on the other side, so we didn't see any staining on those areas of concrete that really warranted any kind of investigation. You'd have to have a big release, but so even several paint cans, we didn't see any evidence that suggested that here's a spot we should really investigate for that.
So you're saying that if there is a big remediation, that the developer is going to pay for the cost, is what I took from what you said. And just another, because I asked. You got time, go ahead. Okay. One of my friends had an oil tank removed from their house. It took years and many thousands of dollars to remediate that. We might have that problem too now. Will we as taxpayers be assessed for that, or will the developer pay that? And also in the future, if someone gets sick in this development and they find a doctor or a lawyer who says, your company did not do the right due diligence and you got sick from mercury or whatever, and our town is sued, who's responsible? Are we as taxpayers going to be responsible for that? Or is the developer? It seems to be, I mean, there's a lot of questions in this area where we want to put this, which I'm sure we're not talking about tonight, other questions that will probably be at another big meeting. Correct. With many people. Correct. But we do have to worry about, we pay a lot of taxes. Are we going to be stuck with this too? Because we want to put this in that one area. Shouldn't it be moved around? That's my question.
Why I was rushing this. This is definitely not a simple.
No, it took my friend, and as I said, just one tank. Years. So shouldn't we be doubly sure?
Well, hold on. Okay, I'm gonna attempt to answer your question. Yes, everybody could just not call out questions. I think that'll make things go smoother and easier for sure. So I think the answer to your question in terms of the remediation of the site, again, and I'll repeat it again because I think it's worth repeating, is that the recommendation is that the site can be kept. Okay, so now if there is some sort of remediation that is required, you're taking the for instance when the current pumps that are at the DPW site are removed and you find some sort of contamination as a result of that. Now, it's my understanding that VHB took borings around that, and that type of material is plume type material. It migrates, it moves, it would go, I believe you had stated the direction of that site is east to southeast, correct?
Yeah, it would flow towards from left to right if you look at the map. So west to east.
Right. So there would be some sort of indication that if that tank was currently leaking. The township also is inspected on I believe it's a biannual basis every 2 years that by our EGIF, and they inspect those tanks, they inspect those connections to make sure that there is no leaking or any impact. So is it possible that when they take out those tanks and at the bottom, I suppose, okay, but that is, again, the site has been given to the developer, or, you know, transferred to the developer, I'll say, because I don't want to say given, because the next thing you know, everybody will say I'm giving it to them, right? Or the township's giving it to them. So I think that the idea there is that that becomes their responsibility.
Will we have a written statement that they will be responsible for it?
Sure.
And
Yes.
not the town?
Yes, that would all be part of the developer's agreement and what goes into the agreement with RPM. So to again, in terms of what is decided with the site, cap, you know, whether there's some sort of remediation, I think taxpayers and the cost to that will certainly be a factor. Also, you know, the site itself will be a factor. There will be many factors put into that decision. Tonight, we are letting you know the level of contamination at that site. The concern that, and again, I'm just pointing this out, I've seen it where it is being called a toxic waste site. So we want it to be clear that there are certain contaminants there. Does it rise to the level of toxic waste site? I don't know. I guess that's subjective to a certain degree, but we just want to provide information to the public about what we've gone through in terms of that due diligence. Okay.
You know, at the time,
Sir, I'm going to ask you. I understand that you want to speak about it and you have knowledge about it. I'm just going to ask you that I'm misleading people.
Because time may not be legal. But the time that a lot of times before, tanks underground usually last about 20 years, still without any fault.
Yes.
So that the facility was in operation for I don't know how many years. We've been in town for over 30 years, and it's been operating. So that's not original plan. So you test this time may not be legal, but it may be contamination underneath. Sure. Because it was tanks over there before.
Could be. Could be when they put in the new tanks, they tested at that time.
So that's what I'm trying to tell.
But I'm not misleading anyone. I'm saying that if those tanks are taken out, you could. Currently, it's not like I didn't say anything about historic tanks. So
people that don't live in the world don't
right,
know
but
about
also when they put the new tanks in, I'm assuming, and I know what they say about assuming, and I want to be careful with that, but I'm assuming that they then, at that time when they put in new tanks and removed the old tanks from that DPW, those aren't the original tanks from the 1950s when that site was in operation. All right.
And tanks from 1950s.
Yeah, but I'm saying when they put the new tanks in, when they redid the fuel island, when they redid those tanks.
The DEP is climate change over the years. 20 years ago was different work than it's now.
Understood.
And 40 years ago was better than.
He mentioned that as well.
So
now, as much as I'd love to have a back and forth with you, I want to make sure that everybody else has an opportunity to speak and ask their questions. Sir's good. This gentleman's good.
Okay, Ted Kurtz, 108 Forest Drive. Yeah, I got here a little late, so I apologize for that. But I'm totally confused by what we know and what we don't know. This is you have a recommendation for a plan. Who decides on whether that plan is acceptable? Is it the EPA has to rule on this?
The development plan or the capping plan?
No, the capping plan.
The capping plan. So that's an application that gets sent to the DEP. We provide them all the information, all the data we collected, and we give them.
Now they're at a level 3 exam. Is that correct? Did I understand that? Is it correctly? Isn't there at a level 3?
I don't know.
You don't know that.
It is.
You don't know what that is. Okay.
Level 3 exam.
Okay. I thought it's different stages that they go through to ask you to approve or not approve this plan.
But that's not a DEP thing.
Who is it?
I don't know. You don't know that.
So if they approve it,
right,
this capping plan,
yeah,
then you would say we have no liability going forward. If we do it, we do what you recommend.
Yeah, that's a legal question.
And I'm sure we do have liability. Answered another question that wasn't answered. Down the road, do we have liability? I'm sure the answer is yes. We could be sued as a town for anybody got sick because the developer is going to walk away. We know that. So, do you have any idea what the cost of your proposal would be?
It's not the proposal.
Yeah,
I thought you said you were proposing a capping. I thought that was a proposal.
We propose capping as the remedy.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah, that's a proposal, right?
It's a report that we generate with a plan, with an application. It's an application to the state to allow the capping. They would issue us a permit.
Permit to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have any idea what that would cost.
The report would probably be similar to some of the reporting we've already done.
I don't know what that is.
I can't-
You don't have any numbers. No one has any numbers here.
Are you asking what the cost to the developer would be?
Well, that would be nice if the developer pays for it, or if we have to pay for it.
That's back to a question for the township.
Yeah, so I don't know why, if again, if
I'm just confused.
so let's
hook here.
So we are doing this due diligence prior to whatever transaction takes place with the developer for them to develop the site. They then can decide whether they're going to cap it and what that cost will be to them. I don't know how much it costs to put in 3 inches of asphalt or
remove whatever you need to remove.
Well, again, I don't that is I don't
how
know.
How do we decide that? Who determines that before we go forward? How does that get resolved?
Because what we're doing now is we are evaluating the level of contamination of the site. Mm-hmm. Is this suitable for residential development? Right. That's the that is the crux of the question.
Okay.
And when that site is then deemed appropriate for residential development, mm-hmm. It is provided to the developer to develop. Okay. Now the developer can say, all right, well, we have to dig out, 1,000, and I'm only throwing numbers.
We don't know the numbers.
1,000 cubic yards of soil to put in the footings, mm-hmm. or the foundation. And then that 1,000 cubic yards is trucked off, and that's part of their development cost. That's part of the cost to develop the site, okay? Then they can say, well, we're going to cap the rest of the site, and that's part of their development cost. I think what the public is trying to determine, right, understandably so, is that is Millburn Township going to go in and remediate the site, right? And so based on the current findings, based on the information that was provided by VHB, based on our due diligence that we did prior to giving or providing the site to the developer, that does not seem like it needs to be done based on these results.
Okay.
Evening. My name is David Hughes. I live with my bride, 24 Franklin, for 54 years. Thank you for your presentation. I didn't get your name, so I'm sorry.
My name is Alex McDonald. I'm the business administrator for the township.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
McDonald, just like the restaurant.
Okay. Right, church. I sit here as a confused resident. There is a lot of information being given to us tonight, which is very iffy, very uncertain. I'm not certain where we are in a process which is potentially going to cost Millburn some money. My suspicion is any developer with a reasonable legal team is going to put contingencies in the deal and be able to walk away if certain things happen. I don't know what those things are. However, what consequence is left for Millburn residents and taxpayers and the township itself? Where are we in this transaction, and why am I feeling a sense of haste, of urgency, of need to meet arbitrary dates that were mentioned of 2024, and it becomes 2022 or 2023? What is the deal? Is that a fair question?
And they're all fair questions. So the date of October 2023 is not an arbitrary date. It is a date that's written in a settlement document between the Township of Millburn and Fair Share Housing Center. So October 2023.
Between the township and
Fair Share Housing Center,
who's that?
That is part of our, that is a advocacy group for low and moderate income housing. all right, that is part of the township's declaratory judgment.
Is that a state agency?
No.
An
Nonprofit.
A nonprofit group.
Yep.
Has reached a settlement with the township of Millburn.
In a declaratory judgment with the courts to
So
satisfy
we
the
got
township's constitutional obligation
Okay.
for low and moderate
The
income.
township got sued.
No.
Declaratory judgment?
Declaratory judgment.
It's gotta be
It's an
litigation
action
somewhere.
So there's an action. So this all, I don't really want to get in. I don't want to get into the history of affordable housing in the township. All right. However, this site being developed is as a result of a 2018 declaratory judgment action, which the township filed as a result of, in 2015, the courts taking over the affordable housing process in the state of New Jersey. In 2018, we filed that housing element fair share plan, that declaratory judgment to the courts. All right. From then until August 17th of 2021, the township negotiated a settlement agreement. On August 17th, 2021, the township settled that with Fair Share Housing and the courts. We've gone through a fairness hearing in January. We are looking at a compliance hearing in August.
Held by who? Hearing by who?
The Superior Court of New Jersey. Okay, that is taking place on August 12th. This particular development at 9 Main Street is as a result of that settlement agreement. That is the reason. It's not an arbitrary date. That is the reason for the haste.
And the date is set in this judgment?
Correct. Sir, I'm just going to ask that you stop calling out. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the source of this
Correct.
deadline.
Correct.
How close to it are we going to meet it?
So we are, look, and I can't speculate too much, but this is a necessary due diligence part of getting to that October 2023 date and being in compliance. So, all right, sir, I'll just ask you to ask one more question and then we're going to move on. Okay.
One more question. Does the township have a timeline and a plan that is available for visiting vision by the residents? Can we know what the township plans to do on what kind of a timeline and at what cost?
So we do not, like a written timeline. No, we don't have that. However, we have certain steps that we need to get through in order to get to what I think is described in the settlement agreement as a shovel in the ground by October 2023. But I appreciate that question, and I think that's something that we should look to develop so that we can provide that to the residents.
That's where you begin for a project of this dimension.
Sure. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Frank Sacamandi, and I live on Lee Terrace. So just a quick point of clarification. You keep saying the site has been provided to the developer. Has that actually happened, or you're saying when the site is provided to the developer?
When the site.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Antimony and beryllium. You said you found those two things at the site. What hazards does that present? What health hazards?
And what are the parts per billion?
So the parts per million are on the board, so I have to look at it. But so what we found that exceeds the DEP standards are benzoate-pyrene.
How high above the standards?
So the standard for benzoate-pyrene is 0.5. We found it at 0.57. Arsenic, we found up to 170. The standard is 19. And antimony, beryllium, and lead. So antimony is 6.43. I forget what these are all migration and groundwater standards that these exceed. I forget what the exact limits are for those. Lead is 239. The migration to groundwater standard is 90. The direct contact standard is 400. So these are all less than the direct contact standard. So the only contaminants that exceed the direct contact standard are arsenic and, oh, I'm sorry, lead up here and benzoate pyrene. And those, because you just can't, the direct contact standards are based on ingestion and inhalation. So you actually have to physically ingest them or breathe them into them to be at those levels for those to be a problem.
When they excavate the site, is there any risk of those contaminants becoming airborne and traveling?
Yeah, right. Most times when you excavate a site, a contaminated site, you're required to do dust monitoring. And at dust monitoring, anytime they're moving, anytime you have meters on the site, and if the dust particulates get to a certain level, you stop, usually wet it down. And so that's how they mitigate those effects.
So when you wet it down,
yeah,
the dust,
it's not
into the water, and where does that go?
It's not a ton of water. It's just a misting to wet it and just keep it in place.
All right, so we don't know how much the remediation will cost. Did you guys calculate that?
We did not calculate.
Was that part of what you were asked to do at all?
No.
Okay. So it sounds like we don't know how much it's going to cost to remediate. Shouldn't we be sure before we move forward with this that this isn't going to cause the town, you know, a huge amount of money in the future? Do we have a bond in place to cover any potential legal expenses that result as future residents at this site suing for health conditions that they claim are linked to the site? Is there any sort of bond, surety bond, or any other bond or insurance that the town has in place for that?
Well, I think in general, the township carries insurance, and we have general liability, EPL, POL, you know, those types. We also have a reserve set up for litigation as well. I mean, that's been in place for quite a while. I'm sorry. The deductible for the township is $25,000.
Yeah. And what is the maximum of that?
I believe, you know, I could get you a firm figure if that's better for you, but I think I believe it's $2 million, and then there's an excess policy at the MEL that increases that. So I'll find out for you.
$2 million, because I think most of us know that when there's environmental contamination cases that result in, you know, people getting sick, the judgments are typically well in excess of $2 million. So does the town have plans to perhaps increase their insurance policy or get a specific insurance policy to cover this site?
Perhaps. I mean, I appreciate that question.
Perhaps as in you do have plans, or you're doing something that you think might be a good idea to look into?
That one.
Okay. All right, very good. So when they start excavating, additional samples will be taken, right? How regularly are they taken?
So if they excavate for the development, they would be required to, any material that's going to leave the site will have to be sampled, and that sampling frequency is dictated by the DEP's guidance. I can't give you exactly what those numbers are. I forget. There's a whole chart, there's a whole table we file based on the tonnage. You take X amount of samples and you analyze for something, and you also have to analyze for whatever the disposal facility requires. So, and that all goes into a report.
Did you guys look to see if there's any information or records when the previous underground storage tanks were removed, whether there's any environmental testing done then?
There were no USTs removed from the area that's going to be developed. The fuel system was on the, I believe, I think somewhere's on the garage side. Correct. Yeah, it was right next to the garage there. Yeah, there's reports.
Okay, and the site is right next to power company owned land, right? There's a substation there.
Yeah.
And this site has existed for over 90 years, right? Is there any evidence that coal or any other materials from the power company may have been stored underground or buried there?
I don't know about stored or buried, but some of our borings do show a little bit of coal mixed in with the fill. So that's typical of, and that's also typical of some fill material, but yes, there was some coal at the bottom of the borings in between the native material and the fill.
Were the levels of the coal consistent with what you would typically find in fill? When was the site filled?
The site was filled in late 80s. I think
1980s.
1980s. report that shows in the 90s is when the DP required the testing, so somewhere between around the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay, so was it typical in the 80s and 90s for coal to be used as a fill material? Yes.
Well, fill material before the DP really got their hand on things couldn't be anything. Fill is a very general term, and you find coal or brick or, you know, so it can be in there.
Entire usage of the site.
Understood.
Okay, so final question. You went down 18 and 30 feet. Is that the typical standard, or would it be wise to do borings that go down further to see if there's any liquid contamination that could have seeped?
So at this stage that we were limited by the bedrock, and because we didn't find any contamination the entire way down, except for the fill, and the fill was limited to 9 feet, and we took samples below the fill, and we found that they were clean, as the native material is clean. We went down even further because we were trying to find groundwater, and we hit bedrock, and there's no contamination between the bottom of the fill, no evidence. We have screening tools, and we didn't see any evidence of contamination down to bedrock, so that's an appropriate place to stop for.
And does the bedrock go across the entirety of the site?
Oh yeah, bedrock's the whole area. Yeah.
Right. I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, would you like to?
I hate to admit it, but I'm 90 years old, and I was born in Wilburn on Essex Street, and I remember that was the coal yard. Why was it called the coal yard? Because the train would come, they would halt, and whatever the cut of coal was to be delivered to the coal yard, you had either peat or you had larger kind of coal, whatever the grade of coal was all along the entire area that we're talking about. And it was also called you also had an office there where you could buy oil. You could place your order for oil or coal. And I remember when the coal was delivered to our homes, and the sheep would come right to the basement window and just fill up the coal bin, and we were all heating our homes with coal. And I know oil, but I don't know where the oil was kept. And I don't know how it got to the owners of homes who used oil. But I can verify that that was called the coal yard. And they had a little office, a little building where you could go and order if you needed coal, or pay the bill for the coal that was delivered, whatever it was. But I lived through it. And I don't know how sound all of the ground there is. I really don't know what other things were deposited there. But that's all I have to offer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that was also part of the preliminary assessment.
Correct. Yeah, we saw the old maps.
Because it was an above ground rail line? It was an elevated rail line that delivered the coal?
Yeah, the line is still there. That's where the train comes from, wherever, and goes into New York.
Right.
To drop you off. But they would stop at a certain time when coal was available and had to be delivered. The cars would just stop right there at the coal yard, and then they would lower something and it would fill into different areas of the ground. And that type of coal was there, and then a truck would come in. And if you were ordering peat coal, let's say, you would fill it up in the truck and then drive over the short hills to the markets.
Great, thank you. Jesse, do you just want to, we have a few people on Zoom. Ms. Urso? Dave Petrucco?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I'm standing on a platform in New York City. Apologize, I can't be there. But the level of comfort that you all speak about what it is you're finding on this site, what kind of toxins you're finding, how much arsenic you're finding, how much chlorine was stored there, how much oil was stored there. And you're all just acting as if we're just working to solve a mathematical equation. Human beings are going to live there. I told this to you a year ago. I told you it would be an EPA victory. The lack of other concern towards humanity, because none of you will live there. None of you would live there. No one in this town or in this committee has ever bought a home that suffered this kind of discovery from EPA, suffered this kind of toxin to the ground. And you're just so, Alex, and all of you, I'm sorry to name you personally, I know you're doing your job, but you need to step back from your job and you need to look at this. There are human beings going on this site. There are thousands.
So to be fair, we can't really understand.
Yeah, I can understand him. No, there was no question. But he said that essentially the way that we're speaking so confidently about what is on the site and what levels are on the site, we need to take into consideration that humans will live there and the humanity of that. And he expressed his displeasure with that. No question.
Hi, Jean Pasternak, 342 Hobart Avenue. I have a couple of questions, maybe a comment or two, but let me start with the gentleman who presented. Is your firm did this work as selected by the township to perform, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What guarantee does your firm provide to the township based on the fact that they may accept your recommendations and implement your recommendations along with a developer that they have selected in case of the fact that there could be found later contamination that results in people becoming ill who reside on the site 5, 10, 50, 80 years in the future? What is the guarantee that your firm provides? Will you accept the liability accordingly?
Well, we don't provide a guarantee. When everything's done, we follow the DEP guidance and we issue the documents that the DEP requires for the township to be allowed to proceed with the remedial strategy of the development as the developer requests.
If you made an error, people do, scientists do, everybody makes mistakes. If you make an error and you're off in your calculations and it is found that your site samplings or there's any kind of problem with the work that you've done that resulted in incorrect recommendations, what guarantee does your company provide to the township in that case?
Yes, all of the work that we do as a firm is covered by our professional liability insurance with the errors and omissions, copies of which have been provided to the township as with any of our clients. Could you give us a little estimate of what that amount, the maximum amount would be in that case that would be provided by your insurance that you just quoted? I do not know what the specific limits of the firm liability, professional liability insurance is, but
would you be able to get back to us on that? And Alex, would you please be able to let us know?
We'll provide a copy. I believe we have provided a copy to the town, but we will make sure we have a updated copy.
Okay. So in that case, Alex, you could answer that question?
Not right this second, but yes.
You could. Okay. That would be really helpful. I'd like to know the answer to that, please. and I'd like it to be shared with all the members of the public. Can I also ask, were you aware that the township at some point, I don't know when, but they repaved the entire DPW site, including where you sampled and back past where the buildings are and so forth. Do you have any idea when that was done, Alex? What year? Around what year? Okay.
It was not done since 2005. Okay.
Well, what I understand is at that time when that asphalt was to be placed there and was placed there, there was a pile of toxic material that was supposed to have been moved away from the DPW site to an off-site location where those types of materials get placed and are sealed or whatever they do to the toxic materials. That was not done. The decision was made to let it air out or whatever, dry out. And that mound of material was moved to various places on the site prior to the asphalt being placed on the site. And if you stand in the actual site, you can see that there are humps or lumps that are visible just to a regular person who's looking.
Okay. Yep.
So it was
Ms.
pointed
Pasternak,
out
can
to
you
me.
just complete your question, please?
My question is, were you aware of that? And was any of those lumps, humps, whatever you want to call them, was any of the testing that you did done on any of those particular locations in the dump?
Thank you. So I think the short answer is yes. Those elevations, as you stated, were identified on the site. That is the area of concern that was spoken about earlier, that was tested. And Paul, you can allude to that a little bit further. But that was that one area with the green native fill in between, right?
Yeah, the area where the material was deposited was on a site plan, and that's what we used to generate our sampling plan that dictated where we took the samples. And so we took the samples through that material, the size of it, on the bottom of it. That's what generated our results.
Mr. Feld.
Hello, do you hear me?
We do.
Hello? All right. I wish I could be there. A lot of questions is, Alex, will the posters that were just showed to us be posted on the website tomorrow so we can see the those ratios that we were talking about, various materials?
Yes. Yep.
All right. Today we heard of this remedial investigation report. When do you expect that to be received and posted? Will it be posted prior to the hearings that are going to be held next week where official action is supposed to take place?
So, as was stated at the beginning of the meeting, those are expected to be completed at the end of the month. I would just like to sort of, as an aside, that it will not be prior to the July 19th Township Committee meeting that final report is posted.
All right. So the question, has this recommendation and these findings and report been shared with the TC members in a separate closed executive session meeting, or is this the first time they're hearing the recommendation tonight orally?
The draft report was shared with the Township Committee.
Well, wait, Alex, I don't understand this. The TC has been given access to a draft RA report, which the public has not seen. And I still think we live in America where there's a democracy. And next week, there's a planning board meeting and a TC meeting where official action is going to be held, where certain officials are given privy to information that the public does not happen. I don't know if that's kosher.
Mr. Feld, I would just like to point out, because I think there's a confusion about this, and I don't mean to sound frustrated, but the official action being taken on Tuesday is as a result of the settlement agreement. The results in this report based on this site do not I mean, this site is not being voted on Tuesday. I just would like to point that out.
No, let's go back to the settlement agreement. The terms of the settlement agreement were not told to the public until it was approved. In addition, in June of 2021, you and Mr. Marizzetti attended a public forum where you told the public that nothing would happen at the dump, at the DPW site, without any prior public input. That did not occur. So I just wanted to create a record. In addition, when do you expect the RI report to be submitted to the state DEP?
The end of July.
All right. Do you have any idea of the professionals, how long does it take to get a response to the submission of that report? Is it a week, 2 months, a year? I just want to look for a deadline.
The DEP doesn't respond to that. As the LSRP, when I submit that report is part of the public record. It's a final report.
But you said that you were going to get feedback. I thought, I may have misunderstanding. I'm an amateur as to certain things. I rely on professionals like you, but you're getting a report. You say you're submitting to environmental professionals in the state executive branch. They just put it in a file, or do they come back to you saying, because remember, we're all talking about housing. At some point, someone wants to get a good housekeeping approval by this state executive branch that this property is acceptable to put housing on it, especially where the state is going to be providing financing it through by either long-term tax exemptions or low-income housing tax credits, or using taxpayer dollars because of the budget. So you're going to tell us that we're not going to be getting a good housekeeping approval from the state?
Thank you, Mr. Feld. We received your question.
I know, and I will never get an answer. Thank you.
So the state, once the developer will request a permit from the state, and the state, and part of that permit application will include any backup documentation, which will be this report. And at that point, the DEP will have a chance to review the findings of the report in order to approve or deny the permit.
Is there a public comment period? No.
Ms. Sherman?
Thank you. I like clarification, so I just want to summarize for my own purposes, Mr. McDonald. Of the 15 areas of concern, 6 were located in the area to be developed. Only 2 exceed the DEP standard, despite the fact that some people call this a toxic dump. If the developer encounters some other contaminant, the developer will proceed to determine how to remediate that. And of course, if it is something that the DEP doesn't allow, it wouldn't go forward. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's that's kind of, you have to speculate there. If it's not uncommon to find something once you start digging up an entire site to develop, but what they find and the levels they find, it depends on what it is. They will likely have an opportunity to try to clean it up, or it's hard to say.
I also think that to the point is that what they excavate will need to be, they're excavating that for a reason, to put in some sort of footing, some sort of foundation. And it'll need to be trucked off site to a site that would accept that material, whatever that material is. And and as I understand it, and things that we've been through in the past, again, like the parking deck, like the underground storage tank at Taylor Park, that material is tested and then brought to the proper facility that's being trucked off site.
Okay, thank you.
CBH.
Alex, it's Kerry Hart. Hi, 56 Byron Road.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Kerry.
Hi. For Paul and Laura, a question. First, just for full transparency, they are a tenant of mine in one office down in Newark. We have no relationship with each other on this item, and nor have we conversed on it, but just to make that clear. Paul, if I may ask of you, the history of the site, again, we know railroad, we know coal, other things. Can you give a little more information? I was a little surprised in your very, very competent report that there wasn't really much there about Sanborn records or its prehistory prior to DPW and prior to Town Yard, dating back to the 1890s, the Industrial Revolution, 1900, 1910, 1920s. Could you give some information on that?
That information is in the preliminary assessment report. Some of it, I don't recall every piece of the history of this property. I do remember, like, I'm sorry, I forget your name. There was the Milburn coal and oil property, but before that, there was something else. I forget what it was, maybe some kind of electric company. But I don't remember specifically what the titles of the companies who were.
If I can, the Milburn Electric Company, sort of the general invention of electricity in Milburn and many other places in the state, the country, the world. Is mercury a byproduct of the early age of the Industrial Revolution of creation of electricity?
Sure, it could be a byproduct of any of those former uses.
Well, I think as a developer, I've done remediation, including the building that you guys are a tenant in, something that actually was messed up by our environmental consultant. We removed the 10,000 gallon tank, soil remediation. We're required to do other things after that with Louis Berger, one of the largest companies around. I don't know their status right now, but I'm just a little surprised. Again, thinking most things can be cleaned, water table, you've answered those questions and I think capably, but am concerned about just capping something that might be more inclusive of mercury either on this portion of the site or on the other portion of the site. Perhaps needs to be done on that investigation?
The investigation was done. Actually, we did probably a little bit more than what the DEP guidance recommends out here. So we have this, everything was done per or exceeding the DEP guidance for this type of contamination.
Well, the question is there a possibility that there's more mercury than you've identified?
Yeah, we wouldn't know. I mean, if there's
I
sample anywhere.
Yeah, and I think, and we appreciate your questions, Carrie. I think the point is that you've delineated an area around that hot spot that was clean.
And yes, it's because of that hot spot and what we found there that we're saying that all this fill material should be considered contaminated.
And I was one last question.
Every foot to prove that we're saying it is impacted.
All right, go ahead. One more question, Kerr.
But is mercury, again, that's my only, again, having read your report, point of concern in terms of liability like down the road. Again, normally these things, tanks and other things I know can be cleaned, but is that something that falls under the realm of being able to encapsulate something of that sort and that we as residents, we as a town should
Yes, you can cap that.
And without concern of liability, and I know that I'm hearing from a lot of residents and I'm less concerned about that type of thing, but is that something that we might have some concern over?
Well, he's asking he's concerned over liability. So I think that, and again, I'm going based on the information that has been given to me, and also I am not the sort of final arbiter of what occurs. But all I'll say is that mercury tends to be an immobile contaminant, and I think that Paul had mentioned that it's a that's based on an ingestion.
Right. Yeah.
Correct?
So yeah, the mercury at these levels are capping is appropriate per the DEP. And we also vertically delineated means we found that it only exists within the fill, and we went into the native material and there's no mercury. So it's not based on what we found, it's not going to make its way to ground.
Ms. Urso? Mr. Schwartz?
Everyone, my name is Jerry Kung. I live on Lee Terrace. I think someone mentioned earlier that groundwater flows west to east in that area. Is that correct?
No, that is the assumed direction of flow based on the topography and the location of the water bodies. Yeah.
Got it. So the other side of the site that's not getting developed for residential, that lies to the west of the site. Mm-hmm. So does it make sense to also remediate that area if the groundwater is going to go from there and then flow eastward?
We'd only remediate something if we knew it was contaminated.
Right, but aren't there contaminants on the other side of the DPW site?
We didn't investigate anything on that side of the development.
Right, so doesn't it make sense to investigate that if the groundwater flows west to east?
No, because groundwater is far, or based on what we found, the groundwater is far deeper than the level of contaminants.
But I thought you just said you didn't check for contaminants on the other side.
We did.
So that doesn't make sense to me. Am I missing something?
The New Jersey DEP does not require you to investigate an upgrading off-site source that's not part of your development.
But just because the state doesn't require that now, if it requires it in 20 years, say, is that going to be a problem for us?
You can't see. I don't know.
Yeah, no way of knowing that, but.
Okay, so, but it's safe to say that if that's contaminated and the standards change, then we could become liable for something that we don't know about at the current moment.
Yeah, I can't really.
Okay, it seems like there's a lot of legal questions. Were there any studies done as to the feasibility of connecting the proposed residential area to water and sewer?
We didn't do that.
Okay, interesting, because the state statute on affordable housing actually says that any land that should be considered for affordable housing should have a suitability study done as to water and sewer. So not a question for you, I understand, but I just wanted to get that out to the public. Have you ever examined land that was similarly contaminated that eventually became a residential development?
Yes.
Can you provide the timeline for remediation that occurred in those cases? And just generally how long remediation took and then how long the development took?
They vary. I wouldn't want to compare any two sites together. They're all
Can you give us a percentage of, not a percentage, like magnitude of how many such sites you've looked at that became residential developments?
A handful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
David Morrow, One Ivy Terrace. I didn't get your name, sir.
My name is Paul Drucker.
Paul Drucker.
If you want to
no, thank you. You are a LSRP licensed remediation site professional. Can you state to me what the name of this report or the grade of this report is? Is this a full phase 1 site investigation?
What report are you referring to, Mr.
The report that they did.
What they've done. So the report that's on the website, the site investigation.
Yes.
So so we did a limited site investigation.
Okay, so it's a limited. I think it's called a limited geophysical investigation.
We did a geophysical investigation.
Okay. Would you say that this statement in there is true? The findings of this investigation should be used only as a tool in evaluating the possibility that buried features are present on the property and should not be considered a guarantee regarding the presence or absence of underground storage tanks.
Right.
So that is an accurate statement.
That's an accurate statement.
Can you please, do either of you know exactly how much this report cost the township of Milford?
I don't recall the dollar amount.
We can get those figures tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mark Webb, South Mandan Road. So I've had a lot of concerns from people about the possible impacts to the township's finances if there's any kind of legal action. I'm just wondering, you know, what other steps we could take to reduce the risk and impact of that. You know, would it be possible, I don't know, as part of the condition of the sale, to put a lien so that if there was a legal action that, you know, we're like the last in the line to pay, maybe fair share housing first, then the developer second, and, you know, insurance third, and then finally us.
No, I appreciate that question. It's a good question. I think that's you know, I think that question has come up several times tonight, and I think that the question of liability or future liability, and so we will certainly investigate that further with the redevelopment attorney as well as you know, our township attorney. I think comparing this to Aaron Brockovich is a little bit. I mean, I want to, you know, let's be careful. That was contamination of groundwater. So. Yeah. I understand. You've expressed your sentiment. I understand.
I'm going to speak now. I'm going to put on my lawyer hat and speak from this perspective. There are two possibilities here. Either if and when the building is built, you put up a huge sign on the building saying that this site has been capped because there was environmental contamination found. And you might find yourself with an empty building because, let's face it, people are going to move there with kids and in all likelihood are not going to be willing to put their kids at risk in a site that has lead, which is known to cause brain damage in kids. And also, I just want to comment as to mercury. The freezing point of mercury, I think, is -37 something or other degrees Fahrenheit, which means that it's always evaporating. So if mercury is in the air at all, misting water on it is not really going to do much. Okay, it's always evaporating. And I also say that as a former chemistry teacher. The other possibility is that you don't tell people. You don't have a huge sign on the building when it goes up that says, this is a former contaminated site, we've capped it, whatever. And then someone gets sick. And let's say they get cancer, and the cancer isn't at all related to this site, but there's going to be years of litigation. I think the solution as a township is you have to require that the contractor provide a defense and indemnification with, you know, $100 million policy limit, so that if the township ever does get sued, it's the contractor that's on the hook rather than the township, because I just see this project as just a lawsuit waiting to happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Of course. I mean, you don't have to go there if you want. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the electric lines too. The substations. Who wants to live near that? Is that going to affect the house too? You also said the indemnity contracts. What happens when the contractor goes bankrupt? We can indemnity all he wants, and he's bankrupt.
So, yeah, I would assume that there are other protections, like you just said, Mr. Webb. So, okay, thank you. So I can't, you know, I think it's difficult to speak to the electrical substation. There are homes in and around electrical substations and other locations as well. There are homes that are underneath high tension wires. So to speak specifically to it, I can't necessarily. But I think that there's, you know, a certain amount of that goes on in a lot of different locations as well. So. Jesse, someone else that hasn't. So.
Good evening, everyone. It's Regina Truitt, 385 Hartshorn Drive. Thanks for the presentation. Just want to ask a quick question and a few comments. Just the basic assumption that prior to this property being approved, that there will be a determination that the property is safe for human residential occupation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And just a couple other things. Lead, of course, is most dangerous when it's ingested. We hear about lead when children suck on windowsills. A lot of old houses have lead paint that need to be remediated. That is the most dangerous thing about lead, is when it's inside and able to be ingested by particularly pediatric humans. And lastly, I'm not a chemistry major, but I would assume that if you spray soil that has mercury in it, mercury is a heavy metal, that the mercury will be heavier than the water and will settle to the ground as it is a heavy metal. So I would assume if proper remediation procedures are enacted, that this property, if those correct remediation measures are taken, that it would be safe. Otherwise, you won't build there, correct?
I don't know if I can answer that.
Yeah, I mean,
the contractor would have to deal with that.
You'd have to deal with which part?
They would deal with all the construction related activities and how they address health and safety and dust.
I mean, it's not unlike what we currently do with sites that have demolition of homes. You know, even in the event that, you know, asbestos removal is supposed to be done prior to demolition by a licensed asbestos removal contractor. Our ordinance still maintains that homes should be watered down as they are demolished for that dust factor as well. And that's also for lead paint and things that other contaminants that might be involved in the demolition of a home, which does occur, you know, in the township quite often. So I think that, like Paul had stated, that responsibility will be the contractors and the developers to make sure that the health safety of the public and the ordinances and other regulations are followed
Would
adequately.
Ms. Truitt take the same position if the proposed
I don't
going to be in Short Hills?
I don't think we're going to ask Ms. Truitt direct questions.
Well,
thank you.
So I would always advocate for a property to be safe and sound for human occupants, but I was reassured by the affirmative answer that the property would be deemed safe and up to standards prior to occupancy. Thank you.
Mr. John Dillon, you're on. I butchered that. I'm sorry. So we do have some time remaining, so we can go back to those who have re-raised their hand and they want to ask us some additional questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, for allowing us to go back again and ask some questions. I'm referring to a December 14th, 2021 Environmental Commission meeting minutes. In those minutes, this was stated. It was the subject underneath the heading Downtown Area Vision Plan, DPW, a portion, this was stated by Jorge I can't pronounce his name, but a portion of DPW is to be relocated to a site on JFK Parkway, which is a watershed area. Many factors are unknown. A concept plan needs to be submitted by 12/31/21 to the Council on Affordable Housing. There could be an extension at the end of February to choose a new location. Waiting on an environmental report for 11 Main, now known as 9 Main, as contamination exists on that site. Joe Barbinell questioned if the response was needed to the environmental assessment by 12/31. Jorge stated a report was done and they are waiting on the outcome. Joe also asked if there was any discussion if the contaminant exists beyond DPW and includes the paper mill theater, old bike shop, storefront location. Who will resolve the remediation? As time is running out, Joe will inquire by email to Martha, Maggie, and Tara regarding the contamination assessment. I just by coincidence spoke to Mr. Barbanel on June 7th. I was calling about getting out the vote on the primary day, and I happened to get him on the phone. So we got to talking about the 11, now 9 Main Street site, and he identified himself as a former member of the Environmental Commission, that he was no longer serving. He's also a chemical engineer, that he had been on the committee for some time, commission, sorry. He said that he told the commission that this site was contaminated. It would be exorbitant costs, those are the words he used, to remediate. And he recommended strongly that there be no residential development on that site. Was that ever communicated to the township and then to this firm that Paul Drucker works for, as far as what our environmental commission member had said or had reported as a member last year up till December?
Not to my knowledge.
Would you mind circling back on that? Because I think a guy with that kind of background that sat on our environmental commission was appointed by our former mayor. And those before, I presume, I think he was on for more than just the last year. I think he must have some information and knowledge that's relevant. And I really do think it's important that we understand why Mr. Barbanel would say that. And I have to be honest, I really just very coincidentally happened to get him on the phone. So for him to state that to me, as a fellow resident, but someone he doesn't even know, I think it's pretty important that it be investigated and understood. And I would really appreciate it if you could follow up on that, Alex, because I did bring it up at a previous meeting and I was pretty candid about it, just like I am this evening.
Ms. Pasternak, if Mr. Barbanel would like to share his thoughts or concerns with us, he's more than welcome to do so. We have gone through multiple studies on the site, which I think are relevant to the actual investigation of the contamination in the site. And certainly I would not question anyone's background or their expertise in anything. But, I don't know whether he reviewed the report, whether it's speculation on what he's saying. I would just go with the information. We're going with the information that has been provided to us at this time based on the multiple studies that we've done. But again, he can reach out.
I certainly understand that. I understand that you might want to do that, but I'm saying a belt and braces approach is really important in this situation, given the potential liability that the township could take on. And I think someone that was appointed and served on our environmental commission, who has a background in chemical engineering and owns his own firm apparently, and does this type of, has very deep knowledge, which is why he was appointed presumably to the commission. I think it would be really helpful to reach out to him rather than wait for him to call you. I think it's really important that you do it. And I really appreciate it if you would, as a member of our community and as a person who's a taxpayer and doesn't want to pay for the liability that I think is being created here, like most other people who are sitting in that room.
If you could share his contact information, Ms. Pasternak.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Mr. Heller? The other one.
Alex, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Paul, Laura, just again, this is not a question. I'm not against the environmental. I don't like this project for other reasons, but I do think residents do need to know things, and me as a resident as well. Can you either anecdotally or empirically answer just a general question as environmental consultants? Who typically, usually, almost always pays for the cost of an environmental cleanup, the buyer or the seller?
It depends. It depends on the agreements.
All right, well, I'll beg to differ.
Well,
I've been in, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you have some experience with that, Mr. Heller, and you can probably state that.
Well, I don't appreciate Paul's answer because Paul's answer was not correct. In the domain of environmental compliance, a buyer might pay for it in terms of a credit. There might be allowances. There might be other things from a seller and from a buyer. But the seller is almost always taking, and I'll cite scores, if not more, both of my own involvement and others, and case studies and readings. We, the town, are going to pay for this in some form or another, whether it's $1, $1 million, 10 million, whatever the number is. Chain of command is something that refers to liability, and it hasn't been impacted very often in the state of New Jersey. And chain of command in the early years, when the first environmental laws were passed around 1982 or so, the chain of command refers to, it could be the lender, it could be the generator, Exxon, Chevron, anywhere. It could have gone through many changes of ownership over a period of time, but the end user or the most recent seller is often the party responsible under liability. But more than just that, is just talking in terms of the sale with regard to Milburn. Milburn, Alec, I know, the township committee knows. Somewhere in this agreement, we, the town, are going to be responsible for this cost. I don't want to talk about liability, just the cost. It's going to be imputed, whether we sell the property for $1, $1 million, $10 million. There's going to be other subsidies and the like. I didn't appreciate that answer from Paul. I don't think it's correct. And I wish to see their case history of clients that they've represented to make sure that we have another consultant, another expert. We've had many that are representing Milburn's best interest, because I don't think that was a genuine answer to what takes place out in the marketplace. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. Jesse, just before you have a question.
One was just brought up from the prior speaker, but I'm Linda Bloniaris, 58 Mountain View, Milburn. So who is the developer? Has that been selected yet?
Yes, RPM Development.
And who's going to be responsible for overseeing and managing the developer and the builder, and kind of doing all the QA in terms of some of the stuff that's been brought up tonight with the developer? This firm?
VHB is LSRP as far as environmental.
So, but is Milburn hiring the developer and then you guys will manage them? Like, is there, somebody asked before about a timeline, like, is there like a project plan and coming out of a corporate environment, like, is there like
is there a Gantt chart?
No. Yeah, right.
So I think to answer that question is that when the agreement is set with RPM and they then they'll be producing a development or a project timeline, that will be obviously, what we're basing the progress of that development on. The as far as the environmental go, VHB is the licensed site remediation professional for the site. They're the ones that will manage the site, as well as the soil management plan or whatever else is going on that site. In terms of your other question, which is sort of like a construction management, firm.
Right. Who manages that? I'm like coming new into this like township committee planning groups and all these, like, I thought corporate was complicated, but so who will who will wear the accountability hat to make sure that the developer is aligning with what you guys have found and doing kind of their job, and at the end everybody's a happy camper? So,
as I understand it, VHB will be in terms of that. When it comes to the developer, it's not our project. However, it's not our contract where we're going out and doing a project where we may have a construction management firm on it that's overseeing the contractor. They have a contractor. They're the developer. They're responsible for delivering a product based on the cost and whatever they've agreed to. So don't know whether there would be a CM from the township overseeing the actual construction of that. So, but I appreciate the question, and I think that's
and is this developer? Because I'm not familiar with all these different developers. Have they done other big developments in our town?
Not in our town. They've done developments all throughout New Jersey, and in particular, their focus is this type of development, which is a 100% affordable development that it requires, low-income housing tax credits to be achieved.
Thank you.
Hold on. I'm not just gonna yell out. Sorry.
So let's say this proceeds. So we're assuming it's going to get pursued, it's going to proceed. They start digging, they find additional contamination, and RPM says, you know what, that's more than we bargained for. We don't want to pay for that. What happens then to the town's obligation to fair share housing? Because the town is sponsoring the project. So if RPM says, no, we can't build it, we're not going to build it, what do we as a town have to do? What are we obligated to do? And what are we on the hook for?
So and again, I mean, this is sort of getting away from the environmental question, because this could happen in a few different areas, right? Where you're saying the developer.
Specifically if it's.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, can the developer walk away from their development? Sure. But I think, you know, the question is, you know, and this is all speculative, but how much money are they out? How much money are they not going to receive as a result of their walking away? You know, and then to answer your question about what our obligation is, our obligation is exactly what's written in the settlement agreement, which is to produce a development that has 75, 100% affordable units. And whether that is, you know, ends up being RPM in the end, I don't know, you know, but then it might have to go to another, you know, place, or, you know, it doesn't necessarily end our obligation if they decide at some point that they're going to walk away from the job.
Okay, so basically we're on the hook for building the building. If the developer walks away because the environmental contamination is too expensive to remediate and no other developer wants to take it on, that means the town then has to pay to remediate the site and construct the affordable housing?
I think that what would end up happening is we would end up finding another developer to do that work.
Right, but if it's very.
But to answer your question, maybe it is our responsibility to do the contamination. I mean, all of this is, of course, very speculative, right? Again, based on the results of that or the recommendation that will be made on the site, you know, you don't know whether they dig, you know, 30 feet down and they find dinosaur bones too. That could hold, you know, I don't mean to be flippant, but I think that that's a lot of speculation. However, to be clear, our obligation does not go away. And so that could mean that, yes, to your scenario, the township ends up having to pay for remediation, or, you know, the township ends up having to get another developer in that wants to do it differently or can do it differently or whatever based on standards of DP. I mean, I think there's a lot that could happen in that situation. And so sure,
let's say the site is contaminated. They've already started excavating. Developer walks away. No other developer wants to do it. Are we able, and we as a town decide, you know, we're going to put this somewhere else, right? Yep. Do we have the option to just fill it and cap it at that point? Or is it one of those things where once you've disturbed it, you have to remediate it no matter what? Is anyone able to speak to that?
Yeah, this site is in the site remediation program of the DEP. So anything that's found, that especially that I find is SOP, has to be reported and addressed.
Okay, so whether there ends up being a building there or not, once you start digging, we as a town are on the hook for remediating it if the
it depends. I think also so what is then the use going to be when you stop digging? So that, I think that plays into it as well. So, I mean, this is very hypothetical, obviously, but, you know, if you start digging, you find contamination, the developer walks away from the project, the township doesn't want to clean it up, can we just cap it again because we're going to keep it as a municipal facility or a municipal building or a, you know, DPW? I mean, I think that's, you know, that's possible.
So given that could be a possibility, don't we think it might be prudent to do as much investigation as possible to make sure that what we think is the case is actually the case? I mean, they did samples down 30 feet. Should we maybe do additional samples in different places? Because once they start to disturb that, it sounds like at the end of the day, we could be on the hook for a lot of money if something is found. So why not do the investigative work up front? So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Number 3, go ahead.
Thanks. Judy Rosenthal, has the contract with the builder already been inked?
No.
Okay, so I would like to respectfully ask that you ask the township attorney or whoever's negotiating that contract to listen to this hearing in full, because the residents of this town have raised some great concerns. And all of these concerns should be incorporated into the contract with the builder. While I was outside, I spoke to my son, Harrison, who works for a firm that does environmental monitoring and remediation. And what he told me is that they use something called the PID to monitor the dust in the air when they're doing all this. And he told me that spritzing the air is like, that's the Band-Aid. But as soon as a contamination is found in the air using these PIDs, which is I think a photovoltaic ionization device or something like that, you have to stop work. And you have to have an environmental firm come in and do this whole investigation and whatever. But that whole spritzing thing that's just the immediate Band-Aid that you do. That's not the cure. That's not the end of the problem. That's just the beginning of the problem. And I think you misled this audience when you told them about, oh, you just take a hose and, spritz it down and everything falls to the earth. I think that was misleading.
I'm just going to comment on your first comment, yeah. and I appreciate that, and I will convey that to Joe Mariziti, who is the township's development. Jesse, I think we have. Okay, sure.
This sounds like mission. You're laughing.
I'm not laughing. Ma'am, I'm not laughing.
I feel like you're destroying this town. Right. And I am really upset. I'm sorry I haven't been to anything before. And I'm sitting and listening to this and listening to everybody. Even though we just a handful of people, this is really unbelievable. What are the benefits for us? Tell me. Why are we doing it? I was in architecture and I know what it means what's happening. So stop it. Stop it.
So, look, we're not just gonna yell out and call out and talk over. No. I'm not talking about you, man. I'm just in general. Talking. And it's. I just want to be clear again, and just because I want to make sure that I'm that this site was, and I mean I know a lot of people have been in this town for a long time, right? That you've heard probably throughout the years, we got to move DPW, we got to move DPW, we got to get it out of the downtown, we want it somewhere else, but that sort of process involves the redevelopment of that site in some way, shape, or form, or putting something there, right, in place of DPW. I think that to speak to why this and the tomatoes and everything, but this is a part of the township settlement on affordable housing. We've gone through the history, we've gone through the reasons why this occurred, back to Mount Laurel and all of that, how towns in 2015, it was given to the courts, and that this is a result, and these settlement agreements in 360 some odd towns throughout the state are all as a result of the legislature or giving it to the courts, taking it away from COA. COA no longer exists, taking it away from COA, giving it to the courts, and making it a legal process in which towns had to file a declaratory judgment to get compliance and repose with their constitutional obligation. So, and I'm not getting into it all. I'm just telling you that's why it is in there. That is why it is here. That is why it is being done. I'm not getting into the rationale as to why that site and all that stuff. I'm just letting you know that that's why it's there. So we have two individuals that haven't spoke yet online. I'd just like to get to them. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if you could just do Mr. Lewis. Mr. Livingstone? Barry?
Hi.
Hello, we can hear you.
All right, thank you so much. I apologize, but I see that you've been trying to get me on and I'm just really, really busy at work. I have to tell you, I really echo many of my fellow residents, property owners. I have spoken in the few meetings with the planning board, township committee, and please, with all due respect, our professionals there tonight, giving a presentation for 15 minutes is truly unacceptable. And I'm only speaking out of experience. I am a property owner in a different county, firsthand dealt with a contaminated piece of property that was done by pure accident. We were subject to DEP, EPA, hazmat, township. This is being taken way too mildly. I want to ask who within our township is working with hand in hand with these professionals, because this, what they're giving us in answers tonight is not enough. If we're in phase 2 and I was kind of slapped on the hand at the last TC meeting that we're in phase 2, can our professionals tell us today there is going to be a phase 3? Am I or am I not correct? Because I had a single family home. You're talking about a large parcel piece of property. And can you also tell me how long this property has been used as the DPW and how many years that we are going back? And does this township, is the professionals tonight giving the presentation, are our town council, are our township attorneys, even our BA, do you feel comfortable enough? And will you be taking the burden of any further possible litigations as far as what's the possibility of physical harm to residents? Do you actually can say that you totally feel comfortable putting residents on this type of piece of property? It took months and months. And I'm preparing for my next TC meeting. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars as a single family property owner for the remediation. And if these professionals tonight in our township is not working hand in hand, if not toe to toe, neck to neck with these professionals and this remediation, and if it's not properly remediated, and again, you can't give us the answer of who's going to be responsible financially. Is our insurance going to pick it up? I mean, who's going to be responsible? And if this, because I know what's going to happen, the developers are going to go bankrupt, because I'm talking from personal experience, because the person that did contaminate my property did go bankrupt, and I'm not going to begin to tell you where the burden lied. And not only, I mean, I can't even fathom to think that I would even put residents on my piece of property had to be totally torn down. I mean, this is just, the remediation went on and on and on. And the criteria and the requirements from the DEP and the EPA were so severe. This is being taken way too mildly. And this is a parcel that's 10 times the size of
Ms. Ursa, we understand. And we appreciate your questions. All right.
But will you, Alex, do you feel comfortable as our BA to say, you know what? I'm going to stand behind these reports, and will you take full responsibility? Or are you going to put the responsibility on your tax-paying residents and property owners? you're going to put this liability on us. You can totally feel comfortable putting residents on here. And to be honest with you, this should be—
Ms. Urso, please, you've asked your question.
Excuse me. What about your DPW employees?
Who have been there for the last 70 years. Understood.
Right.
Ms. Urso, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. You've exceeded the time. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks a lot. I have two questions. First, what organizations, including your own organization, are being paid? And what are the deliverables? And how do we get a copy of the deliverables? That's the first question. Second is, what is the worst case prediction cost to Milburn Township, kind of like a Monte Carlo simulation with the worst case situation? What's the worst case situation of the cost to Milburn, given all these factors that I've just heard in the last 30 minutes and others that you're probably aware of? That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Livingstone, all I can say is that the deliverables that have been provided to the township are on the website under the affordable housing page. I think the question was asked earlier, what has been paid to VHB as a result of, and we had told everyone that we would get that information as well. So in terms of, I'm sorry, the second question.
Worst case scenario.
Oh, wait, worst case scenario. Again, I think that's been asked a few times tonight. Do we have a worst case scenario, dollar amount, dollar figure? No, not, and I think it would be difficult to speculate that based on, you know, a few factors. But certainly I think you have, in what we will post to the website tomorrow, you have some delineations as well as depths and things like that in terms of the soil. But I think that, you know, you can get a sense that a worst case scenario would be, you know, sort of trucking out the entire site. So. I'm sorry, sir. No, but well, perhaps they will. I've noticed a lot of people, you know, raise their hand later. So I'm just so you can call on Mr. Schwartz, who we had tried before.
Hello, good evening. Appreciate your time. So just out of curiosity, I think there's no choice in us getting this done. I think the determination is that you want to develop. It's all about mitigating risk. Would doing radon piping help mitigate any other radon contamination within the building?
I'm not aware of any radon contamination.
I mean, that hasn't been,
okay.
That hasn't been brought up, sir.
Okay, so nothing, I mean, I guess if the site is totally remediated and there's no issues, I mean, naturally, the concern if there's coal or anything else that decomposes underneath the building over time, a lot of buildings now do radon piping. I just look at it like this developer might not be making putting the extra dollars towards the cost. And maybe it's something that it would behoove us to have them obligated to do radon piping just to help mitigate risk.
Understood now. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
The insurance policies to see if there's coverage prior to the period when insurers started excluding environmental contamination?
No.
So
there has not been no forensic
historical deal with the insurance policies, because there used to be a time when if you got a claims-made policy.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, we did that with the Taylor Park.
Okay.
Yeah, the forensic.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. Just quick. No. Yeah. Just like Ms. Oluwabi, you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good evening. Oyin Owolabi, 46 Maple Street. Again, I would like to say how it's really disgraceful, honestly, that the Township Committee has done such a poor job of communicating this settlement to the residents. Being that, you know, some of the residents are just hearing this for the first time, I would like to ask if we can just form a committee. I don't see a problem without trying to give a solution. And the fact that some residents are still being cut off from finishing their statements and, you know, making their intentions and their feelings known, it's just awful, you know, the way we treat each other. I feel like everyone have the right to speak their mind and speak their opinion. I feel like we need to form a committee. I would like to ask the township to form a committee of township committee members and an equal number of residents who can review these reports, you know, and who can make recommendations for second, you know, possible research study, you know, by a totally independent firm, you know, that the committee selects to do an, you know, arm's length study, you know, the ones that the residents can have confidence in. I don't see this as being so difficult to do. I mean, the township committee, you know, have formed other committees. You appoint people to different offices. I feel like in order for you to hear from your residents, a committee of this level should be done at this point, because as clearly residents are not happy. Regardless of our obligations, where no one is saying that we wouldn't build affordable housing, where we're saying that we want it done right and we want it done correctly without having to put all the, you know, the money and the mitigation costs on residents. So, you know, maybe we need to put this in bullet points, because we seem to be going back and forth at every meeting, stating the same thing over and over and over again. We're all professionals. We're all intelligent people. We have a high number of intelligent people in our town. I mean, for people to be celebrating that, it's almost like they're sticking it to Melbourne. Melbourne is not the only town that's going through this. Yes, we know that, but we need things done the right way. So I would like to propose that we form a committee to be able to help with review of reports. This should not be a secret to residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question. If you could get up, that'd be great. Make yourself known, sir. You have the last one of the night.
All right. Richard Cyber, 27 Southern Slope Drive, Melbourne. So this meeting was called tonight because you wanted to make clear, because you said, somebody said that there could possibly be toxic elements on the site, correct?
It has been stated that it is a toxic waste dump.
So are there toxic wastes on this site?
There are metals and pHs
That's
as
all.
you're firing at concentrations
Are
that
there?
exceed the standards.
That's a yes or no.
It's toxic waste is a general term.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for coming out. Appreciate your time. This will be posted to the township website, as well as, you know, again, any additional information that is known. If you are unfamiliar with the website, we have an affordable housing page under our community. There's a lot of information there. We post information there as it comes up and it's available. Again, just appreciate all your comments and questions, and we'll be sure to address those that we said we would address directly, as well.